Okay, here we go. It's been a while. Sorry about my absence. I've been really, really busy. Good reasons. Let me just check that I think I'm in frame. I'm not sure. Yeah, thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for those who messaged me. I'm fine. It's just that I do have ADHD. I have mental health stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean, that I'm going through something bad if I kind of am not doing regular content. I'm the sort of person who will get lots of stuff done at one time. So there'll be loads of videos and then it might be a week or two until there's another one. I wish I could say that I was more organized with that kind of thing, but I'm really not. That's not how my brain works, and I've just had to make my peace with it. So thank you for asking after me. I have been keeping up on all the news, which hopefully you'll be happy to know. I've been trying to take some more photos of headlines. I've got a couple of videos coming hopefully this week because I've got like a few days of time to, get that stuff filmed. So I have been amassing bits and pieces, and thank you to you guys who on Twitter who have like linked me into stuff of value that I need to kind of see for these videos. Also, I'm always pretty active on Twitter because even when I'm like super busy or I'm not having a great mental health time, I will still be scrolling Twitter because I'm like addicted to Twitter. So if I'm still on Twitter, I'm all right. But thank you for your concern. And this is part 2 of the witness statement. I think we're going to get this one out of the way just because I've got so much more to say about it. And then I've got some interesting things. I have recently been watching the reaction to Lilibet as we're getting more information about Lilibet. There's some interesting stuff going on there, isn't there? Which is extremely racist. But I will keep that stuff for the video that that's going to be in. But I have been keeping watch on that and it's been really worrying. And again, like I just feel ashamed and embarrassed. And I know it's silly because it's not like my particular shame to have, but it is shameful and it is embarrassing to think that Meghan came here, right, and she gave up a lot of her freedoms, and the children are completely innocent in all this, and our media, right, and our public are behaving in this manner. I find it disgusting and embarrassing. And I think it's just, I hate that that is the image of us. That, for example, if you're in the US, that you're getting of us, because it makes me feel sick. And, I'm not going to say the behaviour isn't disgusting, it's really disgusting. But I'm hoping that more of us from over here can kind of, put our heads up and say, look, okay, this is disgusting and we're with you. Because, I've spoken about this before, as we'll get into in this video. Tabloids in this country drum up so many sort of evils, right? Racism, insecurities, and they have... they are, if you were to ask me how I would, get rid of so much dodgy stuff in our society, I think the first step to that is to get rid of the tabloids, or to regulate the tabloids, because they are always at the root. And I think underestimating the tabloids is a mistake, because I'm not saying they're, wonderful journalism or anything. I'm not saying, respect the tabloids. But I think the business model they've got, which is profit over people, which is stirring up hatred no matter who it impacts. The stuff they present to you sells because it's sensational, because it's very black and white, because it creates outrage and big feelings in people. And it's so normalised, it's everywhere. You walk into a shop, you see it, you see GB News all over social media. Clickbaity stuff, you do want to click on more. Which isn't a bad thing. I mean, I think that's just how a lot of us are wired. You want to look at something exciting. And we are emotional creatures. You see something that's, oh, look, here's a villain here. Oh, let's hate on them. At first, if you don't look into it, you're probably thinking as a decent person, oh, that sounds not very nice. I don't like bad people. Maybe that person's bad. But the problem is that the tabloids are not it's not journalism. Journalism would be investigating something and using facts. It would be putting a position across in a way that is mature and fair to the other party. The tabloids don't play by those rules, and I don't know how they're still getting away with it, because they're able to whip up hatred and create these frenzies, and yet it seems they're never accountable for what they do. They just keep getting away with it. And obviously our politicians, Harry said this in his trial. I'm loving Harry's arc, because this is a guy, and I always say this, he was born into this royalist, monarchist family. He should have ended up as this arrogant person who thought he was above everyone, went along with all these systems, had his cake and ate it, all that. He could have had that. That was who he was meant to be. But he's actually said, our government is shameful right now. The tabloids are shameful, and our government is too cowardly to stand up to the tabloids. He's 100% right. And I say the government, which is the Tories, and our current opposition. I speak about this a lot, especially on my podcast I do with Heather and Daniel, which is kind of a left-wing podcast in the UK. But there is so much fear, the tabloids have so much power to create this fear, that it's like anyone who is willing to, you know, throw away their integrity kind of accepts that they have to play ball with the tabloids, which is obviously not the morally correct thing to do. So the kind of difficulty is that if you've got someone like Jeremy Corbyn who on principle will say, no, I do not work with the tabloids have a lot of power, therefore they will use that power to destroy that person in the public eye, which is the same thing that's happening to Harry. Harry is saying, I'm not playing the tabloid game, therefore they are trying to destroy Harry. So it's a cowardly thing that a lot of people do. I mean, you see the Tories do it, you're seeing Keir Starmer do it. Even though he's promised at numerous occasions, you know, he wouldn't dabble with the tabloids. He changes what, you know, he will just change depending on whatever's popular, which is terrifying in a leader, because when you've got people like the tabloids stirring up hatred, what do you think becomes popular? What do you think sells? And what do you think that means for what these sort of individuals will lean towards? Right, you can get them to lean towards dodgy things like inequalities and discrimination because, oh, that's what everyone wants, rather than looking at the source and thinking, wait, people aren't bad people, there's some manipulation going on here, I wonder what the source is. Anyway, I digress, but that was interesting to me that Harry was able to identify that the government is at rock bottom, right? Our politicians are at rock bottom, because anyone who actually has idealism and like real policy, right, they actually have the people you want to get into politics. Sorry to do like a bit of a rant here, but the people you want in politics are rarely the ones that go into politics. Because I feel like the right sort of people we need for politics are people who understand oppression dynamics, people who have principles and they want to bring people together, they want to solve injustice, right? That means they can often come from places where, you know, they've been marginalised potentially. So already that's something that's difficult, because we have a political class where a lot of them went to private schools, you know, and they're like super well educated and they play through the system. When the system itself is not equal, how do you get those voices in? Right? Because politics is still like a friends club. And every so often you get someone like Jeremy Corbyn who's come from that kind of privileged system, and like Harry, who thinks, wait a second, I recognise that, and that's not fair. Why should I be above anyone else? They then get destroyed. You know, politics is very much like a game, and it's like a lot of people believe you have to play it to make it to the top. I don't believe that. I don't think Harry believes that. I think the sort of people who watch this channel don't believe that. I believe if a system is broken, like in a really harmful way, and it's hurting people, I think you have to change the system. I don't think you work through the system and become part of the system, because what's that worth? Like, what is the point of that? That doesn't help anyone that comes after you. I can understand in a selfish way, like, oh, maybe it's good for the person at the time. But if you care about the people that come after you, is that not our responsibility to break cycles and to at least start that change, right? Even in little ways, so that the next generation have like more of a chance, more of a shot. Like, I don't know, it's just really obvious to me. But yeah, so let's get into the rest of the witness statements. So we'd gone through kind of the victim impact stuff last time, didn't we? So there's a part in the witness statement where Harry has to list his associates, and he talks about the relevant period of when he thinks he was phone hacked. He basically lists the people he was in regular contact with. So it's got like Prince of Wales, so that's William, we've got Kate's on there, like various friends of his, Diana's on here, his dad's on here. Basically anyone who he had any sort of communication with has to be kind of brought into this. And even that in itself is, it really gives you a window into what this person has had to endure, like what Harry's had to endure. Thinking about every little interaction, right? Every person you've spoken to. Imagine being so stalked by this powerful entity, which, you know, although you're supposed to outrank them, you're not, you're a puppet, right? You're a mascot. They can destroy you and they will. And it's not that they are everywhere, but it's that they could be anywhere. And we touched on this in the last video with abuse dynamics. It's like an abuse victim might be more easily triggered and they might be more aware. It doesn't mean that they're always necessarily right, but it means they always have to be on their guard, because with abuse and things like that, you don't know when it's going to come. So you have to be on your guard. And the fact he's having to reassess his entire life, everyone he spoke to, and also the the difficulty for a victim of having to bring these people into it, right? Because putting them in this document, this going into the public domain, this is another thing that people will use to get at Harry and get at victims, right? Because the message to victims is always, oh, you know, I don't know why you're making such a fuss. Oh, you're dragging different people into it. Oh, isn't that bad? Sorry if I've just moved. I had to plug stuff in. I'm very disorganized. I am disorganizing. I promise I have prepared for this video, but like tech-wise, I'm disorganized. Okay. So then we've got a section which says my use of my mobile phone / voicemail. And Harry talks about, he says he can't recall exactly when he was first issued with a mobile phone by the institution. He thinks it was when he went to Eton and when he was still a minor. He basically says that the institution dealt with the kind of like account for that because he was a minor. And he also says here, it's, as far as I was aware, this was all dealt with by the institution, presumably for security purposes, although that now seems rather ironic. He then talks about the various commitments that he was involved in during this time period. So he says it was school and Sandhurst, his career in the army, and after that, you know, undertaking engagements as a senior member of the royal family. And he says that, you know, at that time it would be very normal for him to be leaving voicemails for other people. So obviously his information being passed over in voicemail to people he trusts. And I just want to say here, you know, I won't get into the ins and outs of phone hacking itself because you need a legal expert for that, and I am not that. But the way he's talking about the relevant period, right, in capital letters, you know, the relevant period, and it starts from his time at school. How horrific is that? Right? This is not the story of an adult who has been abused and is coming forward, which again would be awful anyway. This is a child here. And also, you know, he says that he usually communicated via voicemail because texting was less common back then. He says it was the main way that he communicated with his family, including his mother, who he says he was obviously very close to, especially at the time, to his girlfriend, his friends, members of the royal household, and people he was working with. So again, this sort of invasion of something in retrospect is horrific. You know, we all know what happened to Diana. We know that Harry and William lost their mum, who they both adored, right? And she adored her kids, and they went through this massive grief. But imagine realising after that fact that those sacred times, which would be sacred to you now, you know, all those normal times where you're just confiding in your mum and getting support back and forth, to think that there were strangers with ill intent who wanted to use you, right, and use your name to make money, to think that they were listening to those emotional moments, right? And if you've got a good relationship with a parent or a caregiver or maybe a sibling or even your best friends, these moments are really special and they allow us to be really vulnerable. And like, for example, for me, like with my brother, like we can talk about pretty much anything and we really do like get into it. And I think every person deserves that, you know, to be able to chat to someone in that way. I can't imagine how it would feel to think that I couldn't even necessarily do that anymore because somebody might be listening and it's someone with ill intent. Somebody is possibly getting in there to that private moment. Like, how do you feel safe? How do you feel secure when your most vulnerable moments are being listened to and by people who are treating you like you're not human? Right, like it's a game to them to listen to what you're saying. And this is a child. Remember, he's saying that he would talk to his mother at this time. Well, Diana died when Harry was 12. So they were listening to a child talking to their mother, both of whom were very vulnerable people at that time for different reasons. And to think that in those last years, right, those precious years, that even that is tainted, I can't imagine it. I can't even imagine that. In a minute, I think I'm going to have to put the fan on. I'm sorry. I know it's like not good sound-wise, but it's so hot. It's still really, really hot here. Okay, so he talks about voicemail, like stuff with the voicemail in terms of, you know, he'd hear like clicks and stuff and, you know, there'd be messages that he'd listen to that already seemed like they'd been listened to because they weren't coming across as new. And I don't know the ins and outs. Like, I don't really understand the voicemail thing. So I'm not going to comment on that. But, you know, there are people who've gone into this in much better depth than I have. I think I'm gonna have to put this fan on now. I'm just thinking, where shall I put it so it's not loud for you? I'll just figure that out. I'll be back in a second. Okay, I'm sorry if that's distracting, but I can't do this in the heat. I really can't. It's too hot. So then there's a part which says, impact of MGN's intrusion into my life. The fact that the defendant's journalists and those instructed on their behalf were listening in to my private and sensitive voicemails at the level of detail discussed in this statement rather suggests that they could have heard anything and everything. This not only creates a huge amount of distress, but presented very real security concerns for not only me, but also everyone around me. I would say their actions affected every area of my life. And, you know, we think about, you know, we watch true crime, right? If you think about, I don't know, like the TV show You, which I haven't got around to watching yet. I don't know if it's good or not. But, you know, the idea of being stalked and that feeling of picking up the phone and, wait, is there someone there? Is there someone listening? And that would terrify most of us, right? That would terrify grown adults, people who aren't in the public eye. So being a child in that situation, right, and growing up in a system where there are people who will want to hurt you because of what you represent and that you didn't choose to represent, is terrifying. Like, that in itself would create at least, like, quite severe anxiety, right? It would put you in a state of kind of fight or flight all the time. You'd be always observing everything around you, because when you're abused, for example, you know, it can make you very hyper aware. So sometimes it's weird, because sometimes when you're going through a period of actual abuse, you can disconnect from your body. But in times when you're anticipating it, for some people, you're hyper aware of everything. And sometimes that can make you feel like, although you're present, you're not really living your life, because you're always aware and you're thinking, am I safe? Am I safe? The fact this was a reality for this boy, and he's been monstered in the press, it makes me so sick. I just hope that in the future, when they talk about this, there's going to be so many documentaries about, like, what was wrong with Britain at that time? What was wrong with the people there? What was wrong with the tabloids? Like, what was happening at that point in time? He says here that it created a huge amount of paranoia in my relationships. I would become immediately suspicious of anyone that was named in a story about me, whether it was, and basically he names some people, and I'm sure I can name the people, but I'm not going to name the people. He says, I felt that I couldn't trust anybody, which was an awful feeling for me, especially at such a young age. As I am uncovering the extent of the unlawful activities carried out by MGN's journalists and senior executives towards me, I feel somewhat relieved to know that my paranoia towards my friends and family had, in fact, been misplaced, although I feel sad for how much it impacted my adolescence. How, like, again, and the thing they keep trying to do with this is, oh, you know, he was paranoid, he thought they were stalking him, and sometimes they weren't. And it's like, the fact of, like, how much they were doing it, or the exact times they did, is kind of not that important. The fact is, they were doing it to people, right? We know they've done it to people. And a child in that situation isn't going to be thinking, like, imagine if, like, when you're making a phone call, sometimes someone might be listening to you and sometimes they might not be. How do you think that would impact every conversation you ever had on that phone? Because you wouldn't know which was which, right? So this is already somebody who's extremely isolated by the system they're in, going through emotional neglect, deprivation in different ways. Although, again, you know, I always say this, a lot of material privilege, although often that's used to kind of control him. This is, once again, isolating him as a human being, right? Because you can't trust anyone. He can't trust those people that he loves the most. And again, that's what happens to kids in abuse. It happens to kids growing up in cults. They're taught, oh, you can't trust anybody outside of this specific group. And even then, you can't open up. Even then, you can't entirely trust everything. And that is exhausting. And that is not how we want to raise kids, right? That does not create kids that feel self-confident and able to express themselves. And again, like, you know, there's things to be said about how the royal family does not want to create kids that are self-confident and express themselves anyway. They want to create mascot children. You know, also, I feel really bad for him, because he says, I feel somewhat relieved to know that my paranoia towards my friends and family had in fact been misplaced. And I feel like, I hope he doesn't feel guilty about that, because I hope he realises that, you know, and I don't say this in a patronising way, I mean that when it's you in that situation, victims will learn to kind of blame themselves, and they'll feel guilty if they're hyper aware, and sometimes they'll get something wrong, and that can create a lot of guilt in a victim. But I hope he realises, and I'm sure he does, because he's got therapy, he's got Megan, you know, he's got good people around him. I hope he realises that that sort of paranoia was entirely valid, and whether or not it was always the case, especially for a child in that situation, it's completely normal and natural. Because remember, when abuse happens, abuse isn't normal or natural. So your responses to it, expecting yourself to behave in a normal and natural way and always be rational and always be correct, it's just not something we can expect of victims, because abuse is not rational. It's not normal. To suspect the people around you, even in times when, he's realised that that wasn't correct, that is still an injury to him that wasn't his fault. And make no mistake, or this is my perspective at least, they wanted him to have a meltdown, right? They didn't want an emotionally strong person who could lean on his family. They needed a scapegoat for the system. They needed to make him the problem prince versus William's Prince Charming, and they needed to drive him into that place. Like, they knew what they were doing. These are grown adults with a lot of power, right, who can shape the media and what people think about things. Their project was driving this boy into a state of kind of complete collapse so they could sell more stories at the expense of his life. He also talks about his relationship with Chelsea. And again, I'm going to say it here. Have you seen how ridiculous people are being? Like, oh, he's so hung up on Chelsea. He keeps talking about Chelsea. And I know I said this in the last video, but it's got to be said again. During the relevant period, he was seeing Chelsea. He hadn't yet met Meghan. I'm not sure why it's villainous to have had love interests or people that you love before you meet the love of your life. Why is that a bad thing now? And why is him looking back with affection and thinking, you know what, she suffered a lot and I want good things for her? How is that villainous in any way? Is that not the way we would want our partners to be about past partners? Providing the past partners were nice people and had treated them well. That's what you would want, isn't it? You would want someone who'd be able to say, you know what, they weren't the love of my life. I cared for them. I don't want anything bad to happen to them, and I have a lot of respect for them. But you know what? They weren't the love of my life, and I've met the love of my life. That's mature, right? But he talks about the relationship with Chelsea and it being long distance, and how he was afraid for her safety because they would communicate, like via voicemails about, when she was going to meet him, etc. And he was scared that the paparazzi always seemed to know when she was arriving, right? And it put her in actual physical danger. And this is someone, again, who knows that this is a very real danger, because his mother, at such a formative time, when he was 12, he knows this is a reality to him. He doesn't just know it's a thing that can happen, he's felt it. Somebody you love can be chased by paparazzi, they can go for a moment, and then you get someone coming to tell you, I'm so sorry, they've died. And that's it, they're gone. So that's already in Harry's trauma history. And then to have to think that something nice, right, which is a girlfriend he had when he was younger and wanting to keep her safe, he can't even be that young person, right? He can't even be that partner that he wants to be. None of us could, because he's always thinking, oh, it's my fault, first of all, that she's getting swarmed, and also I'm so scared for her. Like, I am afraid for her. He also says that he really wanted to be there to welcome her when she flew to see him. He says, as any boyfriend would, but even that came with challenges. So can you even imagine, right? He's having to, this is somebody who at the time he loved, right? And he just wants to be a good boyfriend and meet her at the airport. And knowing that that whole situation is not possible because of grown adults stalking them. People much older than this couple, by the way. Think about that. That's so creepy. Like, so many things about the tabloids we've just accepted. And it's, again, to be honest, it's like the royal family, like the idea of monarchy. We just accept things because we're used to them. But if you step back and look at things from a bit of a distance, that's really weird, right? We know stalking's an offence. Why is it suddenly not an issue when it comes to, like, famous people? Famous people who, are famous against their will anyway, but all famous people. Like, why is that suddenly... Why do we think that's okay? Like, we understand that if grown adults were stalking you and your partner, if you were just going somewhere with your partner and a group of grown adults were finding you everywhere you went and taking pictures of you, what would you do, right? You'd call the police, wouldn't you? Right, but we expect him to put up with that. Why? He also talks about one of her first trips to the UK, where he wanted to pick her up with his personal protection officers, which, again, it's mad, isn't it, that you should even have to have protection with you when you do this. He walked in a baseball cap, so he hoped that no one would know he was there, he hadn't told anyone, and 5 separate paparazzi people were sitting on benches with cameras in their bags. They had their hands in their rucksacks, and everyone was looking at him. He said he remembered that someone was videoing him with one of those tiny cameras between their legs. He said, these kind of incidents made me fear for our safety. Here were 5 big, burly and dodgy-looking men with their hands in their pockets and satchels in a busy public place. My security and I simply couldn't know whether they were reaching for a camera or drawing some kind of weapon. And I've thought about this as well, because if you are being followed by, grown adults chasing you around and they're like following you wherever you go and then they reach into their bags, how does he know that they're literally not going to shoot him? Like, how does he know? There's no way he can know. Imagine having that on your shoulders every single day. Like, I don't think a lot of us can even comprehend that. The idea that, you know, oh, I go out in public, I try and do it in secret so no one sees me, and these grown adults have got these dodgy bags and they're getting things out of their bags and they're swarming around me. I mean, I don't know how he did it, because I think I would be really traumatized by that. Like, I genuinely think I wouldn't want to leave my house. I think that would be so frightening, because I'd be so scared of being attacked, or just scared of, like, being myself and emoting, because I would be fearful that they would take pictures of me and it would go everywhere and people would know my private business, and that would just make me scared. You know, and also, like, on a lesser scale, you know, for him it's obviously much, much bigger. But, you know, little things like days when you wake up and you don't want to be seen because you're feeling a bit depressed, or you don't like the way you look that day. And imagine thinking that just going out in public, as a person who was born into this role, means people are going to be taking pictures and they're going to be looking at every facial expression you make and, you know, have you put on weight, or have you grown, or do you look pale, do you look sad? All that sort of speculation would make me want to never leave my house. He talks about how he only went to the arrivals hall at Heathrow to collect Chelsea once, because of the situation, and how him being there made it more dangerous for her, but also dangerous for him. Every other time, they would have to text each other that she had landed, and then his protection officers would have to get her, and she would be, from the airport to the car park, it says here, the doors would burst open, and there would be about 5 or 6 paparazzi literally running circles around Chelsea, so much that Harry couldn't even see her. So the tabloids, these grown adults, were just stalking a young woman. Just scaring a young woman. Fine. He also says that sometimes the paparazzi would be so aggressive in their pursuit of her that they would have to get help from the airport police, and he mentions here that that detracts from their main task, which is keeping the airports and the general public who use them safe. And again, Harry gets painted as someone who's like really arrogant, like, oh, he's using our resources. No, he's fully aware that this should not be happening, not just for the sake of them, but for the fact that, you know, members of the general public need that airport security to, you know, to make sure everything's okay and there's no actual threats. When you've got these random stalkers turning up with their cameras, I mean, that does not protect the public, does it? Because, you know, you don't know what could go on and get past that when the airport security are busy on that. He says there was nowhere that was off limits for the defendants' newspapers. There was no downtime or escape. He says that when they used to try and go on holiday to get away, because they couldn't do that in the UK without being stalked, he thinks that they got the flight details and hotel bookings from their voicemails. And I mean, I'm not an expert legally in this, but I would say that makes a lot of sense, because obviously she's not going to be leaking that because she's going to be fearful. He's not going to be leaking it. Who, you know, I just don't know how they would possibly know that, to be there at the hotel, to be at their destination. And the idea that there was no downtime or escape, you know, nowhere was off limits. This is abuse. This is making him fearful that there's nowhere he can run. And it's like a foreshadowing of what's happening now. Because Harry was born as this mascot. And they always tell us, you know, they tell us with the kids now, oh, you know, it's a choice, they don't have to do it. That's rubbish, by the way. I've got so many more articles and things which I've been collecting about the Cambridge kids, where they don't have a choice, right? It's, oh, George is going to be the king, and Charlotte's going to be the next Princess Anne, and Louis is going to be the new scapegoat, you know. But the idea is that even if you leave, you can't leave. Like, there is no freedom, because if you go, they will chase you. As we've seen, because Harry tried to make it work, right? Harry and Meghan tried to make it work. They eventually decided it's not possible to make it work. So, with, like, regret, because they didn't plan to do this, they moved. They moved far away, right? They took themselves out of the equation, and then what happened? They were followed. And, in fact, it's been more of a frenzy, right? Now it's, like, even more obsessive somehow. And the message is to Harry, their victim, that you will never escape. Even from afar, you move away from me physically, we will be watching and we'll be there and we'll make your life a living hell. Because when an abuse victim stands up to an abuser, that abuser does not like it. And they will often do whatever they can to re-establish control, even from a distance. And we know that from normal abuse dynamics. There's nothing normal about abuse. But it's all about power and control. The victim can't... It's not so easy as the victim just leaving, necessarily. You know, in fact, a lot of abusers, as we see, the abuse actually gets worse when that victim leaves, because they actually feel like they're losing something that they feel like they own. And for the tabloids, it's very much about money, but it's also like a sense of ownership, right? They need him for their headlines. They're making money off making his life a living hell. They need Meghan so they can drum up racist sentiment in the public. They serve a lot of There's a lot of purposes in conditioning the British public. And them simply moving away, if you watch how the villainification, if that's not the right word, of these two individuals, see how it's got worse since they left. That tells you how abusive this system is, because abuse victims are not meant to leave and they're not meant to speak up for themselves. You know, the message abusers want to put out there is that although we'll abuse you whatever, it's nicer abuse if you're here. You know, if you're here, sure, we'll abuse you a bit, but sometimes we won't. You know, that's the vibe. But if you go, and that's what they're trying to do to him, and also they're doing it to the Cambridge children, like, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, they are showing the full force of their evil to an abuse victim who leaves. Because they do not want, and it's not just about Harry and Meghan and the money they make from them, right? And the racism behind it and stirring that stuff up. It's also about the new generation coming up. They need to see, in an indirect manner, and you see this in abusive family systems, they need to see what happens if you try and leave. They couldn't let those kids see that you have the choice of deciding, you know what, this isn't for me, I still respect and love you all, but, you know, I'm just not comfortable with it, I'm going to go live my own life. That could not be an option for those kids, because they need those kids to be mascots and sell their papers and be the next generation of this soap opera drama thing. You know, it's like losing a cast member suddenly in the middle of like a season or something, or a series of something. You know, they will have plans in advance for how they're going to use these kids and their reputations in the public eye to sell more papers. Like, what's the story there? And if one of those cast members decides they're going to leave, that throws out their storylines and they have to think about something different. So it's important that indirectly they are setting this precedent so that these children know, because, you know, it won't be too long until they grow into themselves as adolescents. And, you know, that's a difficult time for anyone, but especially in the situation they're in. They will be frightened that one of those children, or more than one, it could be all of them, they can't let them see that's an option. No way. And they also, let's be honest, I believe, and this is just my personal opinion, they also don't want any of them marrying outsiders. Right? They need to use Harry as the ultimate scapegoat here. Like, they need those children to see that this is what we did to Harry, so don't you dare try and step out of your role, because that's what we'll do. But also they double that up with the sense of, however, if you do stay and you do what we want, we'll make somebody else that role. And, you know, it will still be bad for you, but it won't be so bad. So Harry says that he could never understand, him and Chelsea, both of them, could never understand how private elements of their life together were finding their way into the tabloids, and their circle of friends became smaller and smaller. And again, like, we've seen that with Harry and Meghan as well. And I often see, a lot of this is fiction, by the way, you know how they always pretend like, oh, Meghan's a mean person, Meghan doesn't have friends, like, oh, she's turning everyone away from her. And it's weird, because it's like, who are Kate Middleton's friends? And I'm not saying that's our business, but they don't give it the same level of scrutiny, right? They don't think, oh, Kate stopped seeing such and such a person. Is it because she's mean and she's falling out with people? Like, no, they don't do that. The idea that their group of friends is becoming smaller is, again, like, it's a necessity. It's an unfortunate side effect of being abused and monitored, because they're made to feel unsafe. They have to make sure that the people that they're with, they have to vet those people. And that must be difficult, because if you're one of those friends, hopefully, if they're good friends, they would be the sort of people who think, I understand entirely the situation they're in, and that doesn't offend me. But some people don't like that. You know, it cuts down your friendship group. It means that you don't have these connections. It takes something from you in your own personal life. So Harry is becoming more and more and more isolated, because they need to, with a victim, grind them down so they're more easy to manipulate, right? The system wants to manipulate Harry. He also says about how he found it very hard to trust anyone, which led to bouts of depression and paranoia. This is just awful. Like, it upsets me to think about this, because this is not something this boy asked for, and I'm sorry, I know I keep going over this, but this is someone who actually got sent into a state of depression, right? He actually went into a depression after the public loss of his mother and all that other stuff that's going on, and then he goes into a depression where he doesn't feel like he can trust anybody. He doesn't feel like he can find love, because when he does, the tabloids destroy that person, and he doesn't want to be making their life more difficult. He's been made to feel like a burden, like somebody who can't make their own choices, like somebody who can't get anything right, somebody who is trying their best, but whatever they do, it's wrong. Like, and that is what it is to be abused. That is what it is, because the goalposts keep on moving, and eventually the victim starts to think, well, I can't do anything right, no matter what I try, therefore I'm going to stop trying. And then the abusers turn on them and say, look how pathetic this person is. Like, they can't do anything right. Like, look, even they're saying that. Even they admit it. And really, they've ground a person down from childhood to feel like whatever they do is not good enough. The message that he's getting as a human being is that people close to him, because of him, or the attention around him, is putting them in danger. Every relationship he gets into, he's starting from a place of, I really care about this person, but I feel like even being with them is making life more difficult. And it's so sick. It's so sick. Okay, I'm sorry about the fan again, but like, it's so hot and it's too much. Okay. So at the bottom of this witness statement, I mean, the majority of it is mostly different incidents where he talks about different articles that were written about him. And to me, reading this, there's two layers to this, because first of all, he's trying to prove that these articles came out because of phone hacking, right? So there was illegal information gathering and they wrote those articles. I would say the second layer to this is that even if there was no phone hacking, the very act of publishing these stories, in my view, ought to be illegal, and it is immoral. And something they say about Harry a lot, you know, they say, oh, he's trying to silence journalists, and I don't think that's the case. I believe very strongly in the freedom of the press, right? To do real journalism and to expose injustice and to ask difficult questions. And I'm not someone saying that they shouldn't touch controversial things. But I think that there's a moral line, and I think the tabloids know what they are doing. When an article brings no benefit to the public, right? If it's not in the public interest, I can't see, and I really can't work out how it's in our interest at all to emotionally torment this boy. Why is that in our interest? It's just a soap opera. And we have soap operas which are acted in this country. We can enjoy those. Instead, these are real people. And I think it's really well demonstrated with these articles that are listed here, because these are not articles that have any bearing on us. And actually, when it comes to things that do have bearing on us, like tax paid and, you know, what members of the royal family are spending, you know, from taxpayer money and all those kind of things, that stuff's hushed up. That's in the public interest, right? Because if we have a royal family, which I don't think we should, then we need a bit more transparency, right? About where the money's going and what they're doing, etc. Because, and it's difficult because, again, family and firm, and it shouldn't exist, you know, it doesn't make sense to me, it's horrible. But that's the sort of thing that would be journalism, right? Those sort of things would be in the public interest. But these things are hushed up. These things are not put out there. These are the sort of articles that have come out and came out about Harry since he was a child. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them. There's loads, and you can go through this witness statement yourself, and it's just depressing. But Diana's so sad on Harry's big day, which was in the Mirror in 1996. And it has a picture of Harry at the top, and it contains details of Diana coming to visit him at Ludgrove on his 12th birthday. And it includes how long she spent with him at the school. There's a quote from a couple who were walking on a nearby footpath, who Harry doesn't believe exists because he didn't see them. That's what the paper is saying, that's how they got their information. And also he questions about like how that couple that were randomly walking would be able to know that she was in there for 20 minutes. Like, were they just waiting outside for her to go in and out? And here's the thing, right? I actually believe him. I think this probably is hacking. I think it's really odd. But even if it wasn't, why on earth would two members of the public reporting on a mother going to see her child at school and how long that took, like, why would that be published anywhere? Well, what use is that to anyone? That's not Diana doing a royal function. That's not Harry doing a royal function. That is a child's birthday, right? In a normal school, you know, imagine your local school and the school you went to. Imagine if when you as a child were like picked up by your parent, people were reporting on that in the papers. Like, what about child protection? Right, why do we accept this stuff for the royal children when we know it's sick and should not be done to other children? Like, that's just not what you do. The article also said that Harry was distressed at the ill health of somebody, a gardener that used to work with his father, and that they were close to. And it said that Harry was taking the divorce of his parents badly. He says here, I think it's ironic for the defendant's journalist to be remarking on how difficult I was finding this period, when articles like this and the conduct of the press, including the defendant's journalists, contributed to that feeling. While I was sheltered from a lot of press coverage by my family, I recall seeing the odd headline in newspapers at this time, as copies of the newspapers were placed in the royal residences, and obviously other children at school talked about things they'd seen or read. Having every detail of your family life played out publicly is particularly difficult as a child. Knowing now that the defendant's journalists were hacking everyone's telephones and private communications makes it even more distressing and unethical. And again, I'm so glad he's pointed this out. And again, I'm going to say it, Harry's smart. He has a social intelligence. I don't know how he is academically, and it doesn't really matter. There's lots of different forms of intelligence, right? But he spots systems and he spots hypocrisy. And again, that can be the gift of a scapegoat. In the system, if you understand it in the system, in your family system, you can apply it to elsewhere. So he's already identified that there's some victim blaming going on, there's some gaslighting, because he's thinking, right, these guys are making the divorce more difficult for me. They are making it this public spectacle. They are making it so my peers at 12 years old are talking about it. They know my private business. That is in turn making Harry more upset as a child. It's making him more anxious. And then they have the nerve to talk about how poor Harry was so distressed by it, when they are doing the distressing. Now, here's the thing, like, I come from a divorced family, so my mum and dad divorced, and I was young. I was only 3.5 when my mum and dad divorced. So although I do actually have memories of it, like some not great memories of it, you know, I think sometimes bad memories stick in the brain more, you know, I do have memories about that. But I was little, you know, I was very young. When you think about a child going through that at an age where they're more aware, right, it's difficult enough as it is. If you're someone whose parents have divorced at an age in your life where you were an older child, it's so difficult as it is, right, to get your head around. It's a difficult thing, and it can feel like your heart's breaking sometimes. Now imagine going through that, the divorce of your parents, with the eyes of the tabloids on you, and everything being put over the papers, and everyone talking about it, and everyone having an opinion about it. And you're a 12-year-old boy, right? In Harry's case, 12-year-old boy. How is that going to affect him at school, right? This is, again, and I say this about Louis. They talk so much about, oh, he's this funny kid, and he makes these big facial expressions, and he's a clown, isn't he funny? And I'm not saying that he's not expressive, and I'm sure he is, you know. I don't know anything about him. He might be a really great, vibrant little kid. But this focus on his expressiveness, right, is going to be something that his peers pick up on. And it's going to be something that he's going to feel either self-conscious about, or he's going to try and play into it more because he thinks that's his role and people like that. You know, having your face memed as a 5-year-old in an age of social media when you're with other kids is going to be difficult to deal with, right? All the kids will talk about that stuff. And it reminds me again of the situation with Harry and Meghan, where they try desperately to they spin something really normal into something bad for them, right? They try and push them for a reaction. And if they ever do get any sort of reaction, which, to be honest, they don't really get. I mean, they get it more with Harry than Meghan. I think Harry is he's more open with his anger. I think with Meghan being a woman of colour and in her position, I think she realises that anything she does is going to be extra scrutinised. So I think it's more difficult for her to even express that. But it's the same pattern of causing distress to people, the tabloids causing that distress, getting images of the distress they've caused, and then further making things worse by saying, oh, actually the distress was about something else in the soap opera. And it's not true. And it's like your actual human emotion becomes part of the drama. It's like when they chased Meghan and Harry in the car, and Meghan was kind of sitting there and trying to, like, remain calm. And people were saying, oh, you know, she's so fake, she's planned it. No, she's a woman of colour who knows that anything she does is going to be, like, presented with racism, right? So she's desperately thinking, I'm going to try and not emote here, because whatever I do, if I look upset, they're going to say that I'm this villain, or that me and Harry are breaking up. And if I look angry, they're going to say that I'm an evil person, and, oh, look, I'm so domineering and out of control, and I'm this angry black woman stereotype. That's the aim of the tabloids. They chase them to get a reaction. I mean, you've probably seen the clip of when Harry was younger, and I think he pushed somebody, like, he pushed the camera out of their hands. And the idea that it was used to be like, oh, Harry's so dangerous, Harry's so angry. And it's like, no. He was being stalked by people, and he pushed a camera away. And we do that to victims, right? We push them into situations where they lose it. They might get abused into a state of anger or distress. If they're abused into a state of anger and they fight back, it gets reframed, the situation gets repositioned, the timeline is changed, so it looks like they're the one who started it. If they get upset, which tends to work better with women usually in the media, it's reframed to make that woman look like she's unstable, so that anything she has to say in the future can be discounted because, oh dear, like, poor woman, she's lost it, you know, she's untrustworthy. And they did that very much to Diana, because Diana was liked, and they understood that, you know, they're looking at a white woman here. With Meghan, it's easier for them to dehumanize her because there's so much racism already in this country, and there's already stereotypes about, you know, black women being like angry and difficult, and a lot of people will look at something neutral with Meghan and they'll believe those interpretations because of the racism. With Diana, that was more difficult. So with Diana, they infantilized her more. So what they did to her was they made her seem like she was completely unstable. So poor Diana, you know, they took her agency from her. It was like she just can't cope, and poor thing, she's breaking down. And, you know, we do care about her, but gosh, she's not trustworthy, is she? She's totally flaky and she's a bit thick, but we love her, bless her. And it's like that was not even the reality of who she was. It turns out that she had valid concerns. There was a huge age difference between her and her husband. She was treated appallingly by the family and the press and the firm. So any mental health issues that maybe already existed but got worse or were even created in that system were then used to turn it around to say, oh look, Diana's the problem. And that's what abusers do every single time. And the sick thing, let's just go back to that last article about Diana visiting Harry's school, right? And again, a sacred moment for him now, being with his mother, thinking that all this stuff was going on behind the scenes, that was anything he had with her like just them. And I'm not saying it wasn't real. Of course it was real. Like, they loved each other so much. She obviously adored her children and they adored her. But the idea that, think of a treasured childhood memory and then think about the fact that there are nameless, faceless strangers there who are trying to watch that and listen in on it. And it just changes everything. Like, it makes me feel sick to think about, you know, my treasured memories and that being something added. You know, it also means, to be honest, that there's a real chance that it means that Diana didn't get to see her children as much as she could have. Because if you're thinking about all these security concerns, you know, all those spare moments she might have thought, oh, I've got a bit of time, I really want to see my kids. It wasn't that simple because the paparazzi would be stalking her. You know, they had to be more careful. All those extra moments that, looking back now, will mean everything to Harry. You know, all those bits of time when they could have had more time together, but they didn't, because of that system, because of the planning, because they couldn't just go someplace, you know. And Diana really tried. She really tried to give them that time with her that was just them together. And obviously it was extremely successful because, I mean, I know that a lot of people, I'm not a fan of William at all, but what I will say is that they both loved their mother. They both really loved their mother and she really loved them. So she was very successful in doing what she could there. But the fact that she had to, like, think around it, and the short time they had with her is just completely heartbreaking. They also talk here, you know, there's a couple of articles and I feel like this is going to be too long, but they talk about, you know, 3 a.m. Harry's time at the bar, which was in the Mirror. And again, this is a 16-year-old. This was his 16th birthday. Why are they reporting on what someone does for their 16th birthday? Like, I'm not being funny, but you guys, like, in your teen years, did you go, like, I'm sure we all had times where we were a bit wild, or we did something embarrassing, or, you know, you're growing into yourself, you're finding out who you are. Imagine the tabloids reporting on that. What a 16-year-old does for his birthday. Like, it's sick. Like, imagine it was your child turns 16, and then the next day all the papers are talking about it, and you were a normal person. Wouldn't you call the police immediately? He talks about it being reported on when he would get injuries at school doing rugby or something, and these weren't life-threatening injuries. They were literally just like broken bones or just like random injuries you'd get. And he talks about how he was teased at school a lot because of these articles. And again, this is an adolescent boy, right? You're just growing into yourself and who you are. And that kind of thing, like being open with your vulnerability, with your like physical vulnerability, is a big deal. I don't think what a teenage boy needs is the papers to be remarking upon, oh, he's broken a bone or something, and it's a huge drama. And, you know, people are so different. I know a lot of boys of that age would probably think, I don't want people to know about that. You know, I don't want people talking about the injury I have. You know, that feels vulnerable to me, and I don't want that out there. And again, like, he's right. It's not life-threatening. Why does the public need to know about that? Like, what about child protection? If your child went into school and hurt themselves, right, they got a minor injury, you'd probably, get called to collect them, etc., and you might get them checked out of the hospital. But imagine the next day it's in all the papers. Right, again, it's hard for us to even comprehend that, because that sounds mad to us. That's the life Harry was living. They talk about Harry's drug taking and telling the public that. And again, it's a case of, this is a child who's gone through abuse and grief. And we know that, obviously taking drugs, not a good thing to do. It's not something I would recommend. But a lot of people who've gone through trauma and abuse self-medicate, people who are depressed, it leads them down dark paths, right? And we know that addiction can often come from trauma and from stress and a feeling of being trapped, like you don't have any power. People sometimes use it as an escape when they can't physically escape or mentally escape, and Harry couldn't. But he says the News of the World presented the story about his habitual drinking and drug use. And he talks about how difficult that was because, once that gets out there into the public domain, that's what people think about him. It impacts his jobs, it impacts his time at Eton or, in the army or something. And again, I'm not saying that, taking drugs is a good thing to do, but what I'm saying is we haven't experienced, like, a lot of us have made a lot of mistakes growing up, right? That's what teenagers do, right? Teenagers will make silly mistakes, they'll realize it's not the right thing to do, they will become better people, they will grow into better people, they'll learn from their mistakes, and then they'll become amazing adults. And hopefully they use their own experiences to then look at the next generation, like with their own kids, and kind of impress upon them, look, like, I'm here to support you, don't go down the road that I did. But imagine if every single one of us, right, had any time we'd ever tried a cigarette or something, like, brought to our employers and the world at large, right? It's defining this boy by his teenage mistakes, which he made while he was being abused. He also says about he was really scared because Eton had a zero drugs policy in place and he was really scared he was going to be expelled. And again, like, this is not our business. This is not our business. If the school, had found out themselves and they wanted to expel him, like, that's up to them. That's his life, that's his education. Why do we need to know about this? And why are they so determined to sabotage this boy? And again, I feel like I don't need to say why. We know why. They need him to be the bad one. They need William to be the good one. And actually, I'm going to leave it with this one because this one made me really angry. It's called Plot to Rob the DNA of Harry. And it was about, there's a plot to steal a sample of Harry's DNA to test his parentage. And he has to talk about in this statement, this rumour that the tabloids put out there that Harry's biological father was actually James Hewitt. And he even says here, this is a man his mother had a relationship with after he was born. And again, like, it's not our business anyway. And the idea of a child's parentage being questioned in a system where blood is everything, right? That's what he's learned to see as important in that system. Thinking you might be excluded from that and that you're being pushed out and that you might be different is terrifying for a child. And again, like, I feel like just looking at Harry as well, and it wouldn't matter, right, if that was the case. It's not the case. Obviously, it's not the case. In a system like that, which is so big on, like, DNA and stuff, the moment Harry got with Meghan, right, they didn't want that to happen. The firm didn't want that. Are you telling me that if they actually thought that Harry wasn't biologically Charles's, they wouldn't have put that out there by now? They would have done anything they could to try and delegitimize Harry's kids. And Meghan, right, by extension. That's obviously not true. Like, it's obviously not a real thing. This is a country where the tabloids are trying desperately to completely destroy him. If they had that in their arsenal, they would have used it a long time ago. And he talks about how when he was 18 years old, he'd lost his mother 6 years earlier. Stories like this felt very damaging and real to him. They were hurtful, mean and cruel, and he was always left questioning the motives behind the stories, with the newspapers keen to put doubt into the minds of the public so I might be ousted from the royal family. And these are not things that an 18-year-old should have to be dealing with. An 18-year-old who's gone through trauma, who, this is the relationship with his mother, right? And it's also a kind of smear on her, like, after she's died. And also it's after the point when the tabloids have said they're going to lay off William and Harry as they grieve. Right? And, they might say, oh, they've had their time to grieve. You lose a parent in those circumstances at a young age, you might be grieving for the rest of your life. All these people saying, oh, 18's old enough to have it questioned. It's like when they try and say that Archie and Lily don't exist. Like, the only reason people are saying it's not in the public interest. It's just a way to get rid of someone. Right? It's like, oh, this one's troublesome, or this one's our scapegoat, so we're going to make it seem like they're not even ours, biologically. And again, that's one of the things I find really awful about the royal family. And I don't know how it works legally, but to me, like, having an adopted child or a surrogate even, you know, doesn't make you less of someone's child. I don't believe that biology is everything, because we know that a lot of parents like abuse their kids, etc. So obviously I'm not saying there's nothing special about a blood connection, but you can also have very fulfilling and, you know, equally as important bonds with being a caregiver to a child that isn't biologically yours. You know, why is that a thing? It just seems like a way to humiliate him, and again, to make people think that, oh, it's got to be William, because we don't want people thinking, oh, maybe it should be Harry. No, it can't be Harry, because, hey, he's got red hair. James Hewitt has red hair. And it's like, yeah, so does Diana's family. His mum, they've all got the red hair. Oh, no, he can't be, because he's not actually Charles's son. You know, even if that was the case as well, like, and it's not the case, I'm sorry to even say this, he's still Charles's son anyway. Like, you know, it wouldn't make any difference. But yeah, anyway, thank you for bearing with me. It's really long. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about this. I've got some videos coming. I've been collecting stuff over the weeks I've not been on here. Hoping to record another video tomorrow morning, I hope. It won't be a really long one, but I have been recording stuff. So thank you for bearing with me. Glad to be back. All is good. I've been, like, busy and stuff's been going on, but I'm happy to be back. Love you loads. See you really soon, and I hope the fan wasn't too distracting, and I hope the next time I talk to you it won't be so hot. Alright, love you. Bye.